we're going to be in chapter 11, but in chapter 1, you have Jesus among the golden lampstands and the people, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders just bowing down to worship him in the highest glory. So we have the introduction to Jesus and where he belongs in the scheme of things. And then in chapters 2 and 3, it's the letters that Jesus instructed John to write for the 7 churches of Asia. And then in chapters 3 and 4, the glorious throne scene of God in heaven, and just so many wonderful images of that, and the praising and praising and praising of God during those 2 chapters. And then chapter 5, a scroll is introduced that has 7 seals on it that no one can open, except when they looked around, finally the Lamb appeared, and he was worthy to open the 7 seals. And in chapter 6, we have the opening of the first 6 seals. When a book is sealed with 7 seals, you can't open it until the 7th seal is open, so that you don't get the message of the book until the 7 seals are open. So these 7 seals are not the book; they're not the scroll. They're what has to happen to open the scroll to see what's inside. The first through the 4th, or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, each one of them having something to do with war and conquering and famine and death from war, but they're all dealing something with war. And the 5th seal is the martyrs under the altar of God. And they're all saying, "How long, O Master, until you avenge our blood?" And so this vengeance is the war that's brewing. God is about to take vengeance on all the prophets and the apostles that have been slain from time immemorial. The vengeance is about to happen, but these martyrs are told, you got to wait a little while. First of all, some people have to be sealed, and then before that's mentioned, the 6th seal is the earth is shaken, and it talks about the wrath of the Lamb. It's right nearby, but they're told to wait, chapter 7, till the 144,000 Jewish people of the tribes of Israel are sealed. And these are the Christians that had become Christians since Peter preached the first gospel sermon in Acts 2 up until 70 AD. All these Christians that are still alive and scattered around wherever they are, God says, I'm putting my stamp on them, and nothing's going to happen to them in this destruction that's coming. And then the 7th seal is opened, and when the 7th seal is opened, 7 trumpets are revealed, and the 7 trumpets are announcing what's in that book, what's happening. And before they start blowing their trumpets, these angels, another angel with a golden censer filled with incense, which is the smoke of the incense is the same as the prayers of the saints that are going up. How long, O Master? And he fills that censer with fire, and he throws it down to the earth. So there'll be fire on the earth. The conflagration is beginning. And then also in chapter 8, we have the first 4 of the trumpets, and they all have to do with war and consequences of war. I'm not going to name them all, but we've all gone through that already. But at the end of the 4th trumpet, then 3 woes are introduced, which coincide with the last 3 of the trumpets. And so in chapter 9, you have the 5th trumpet blows, which is the first woe. And then the 6th trumpet also, which is the second woe, all having to do with terrible things happening. And then and in chapter 9, after the people had been told to wait, it's not happening yet, just wait a minute, some things have to happen. Now in chapter 9, verse 13 through 11, 14, 2 whole chapters, you have the 4 angels of destruction are released. And in chapter 10, a mighty angel swears by the Almighty God, the mystery of God will be finished. We talked a long time about the mystery of God, and a lot of Old and New Testament passages, things that angels desire to look into. It's finally going to be finished and revealed and finished. So then it brings us up to where we are now on chapter 11. But before we get into chapter 11, I just wanted to read a passage from Josephus. As you can see there, I wrote there, Titus did not want to destroy either Jerusalem or the temple. So when Vespasian and Titus were dispatched to go to Israel, their task from Nero, Nero's the one who sent them over. The task was to subdue the nation of Israel once and for all. These guys had been rebelling, and Nero says, we're done with this. You guys go over and make it stop. That was their job. They didn't necessarily want to destroy everything, which is what ended up happening. The reason that it happened is because the Jews were so stubborn and contentious, they wouldn't let up. Here's the Jews thinking, we are the children of God. Nobody can take us. The Romans are occupying our land. We need to get them out of here. They were rebelling. The Zealots were causing skirmishes with the Romans and just causing untold problems. And that's why Vespasian and Titus had to come. But I want to, from Josephus, show exactly what the attitude of the Romans were. So we're going to read a passage here in book 6, chapter 2 of the Wars of the Jews by Josephus, paragraph 3. However, when Titus had recalled those men from Gophna, without reading a whole bunch of paragraphs in front of this, a bunch of people had been captured by the Romans and sent off. And then the Jews that were still left were accusing them of being traitors. And so to prove that the Jews had said that they had been killed by the Romans, and they were all upset about it. Well, when Titus heard about it, he recalled those men from Gophna, gave orders that they should go around the wall together with Josephus and show themselves to the people, upon which a great many fled to the Romans. To the Zealots that were trying to keep battle going and against the Romans, they were making up stories to try to get the people against the Romans as well. The people that didn't really, some of them were saying, no, we need to just bow to the Romans. They're going to take us. Others were kind of indifferent, just like we have today, all different kinds of people. As soon as they found out that the Zealots were lying to them, that those men had not been assassinated by the Romans, then many fled to the Romans. And these also got in a great number together and stood before the Romans and besought the seditious with groans and tears in their eyes. In the first place, to receive the Romans entirely into the city and save that their own place of residence again, but that if they would not agree to such a proposal, that they would at least depart out of the temple and save the holy house for their own use. I think there's a little grammatical error in there, but what they were doing was they got a big group of them together that got out of the city. Just for the visitors, the city was being overrun by the Zealots. 2 groups of Zealots that had come in. They were killing their own people. Thousands of Jews got killed by their own people, and the Zealots groups were fighting against each other and against people. A lot of people were dying, making it a terrible place to be. And this is in the last 5 months of when the Romans had started to knock down or knock at the walls of Jerusalem to take it. These people got a great group of them together to beg these zealots who were in control in Jerusalem at the time. And they were just begging them with groans and tears in their eyes to just let the Romans come in. And if you're not going to do that, at least get out of the temple so they won't destroy the temple. These guys had perverted the temple. They had gone in. These men were not Levites or anything. Only the priests were allowed in the temple, the holy place and the most holy place. They had just gone in, done all kinds of stuff that we'll read some more about as we go through class today. But so they were just begging him, at least save the temple. It says, and save the holy house for their own use, the proper use. Anyway, for that the Romans would not venture to set the sanctuary on fire, but only under the most pressing necessity. Yet did these seditious ones, the seditious is talking about these zealots that were occupying Jerusalem and the temple. For those of you that are visiting, we've read some horrible stuff about what these guys were doing, including dressing up like women and prancing around, and you just wouldn't believe it unless you read it out of Josephus. And they had swords under their skirts, and they would just kill anybody that said anything to them. Anyway, that's just one of the little things that was happening. But anyway, yet did the seditious still more and more contradict them. And while they cast loud and bitter reproaches on these deserters, they also set their engines for throwing of darts and javelins and stones upon the sacred gates of the temple. Can you believe Jews are doing that to their own temple at due distance from one another, insomuch that all the space around within the temple might be compared to a burying ground? So great was the number of the dead bodies therein, as might the holy house itself be compared to a citadel. Accordingly, these men rushed upon the holy places in their armor that were otherwise unapproachable, and that while their hands were yet warm with the blood of their own people, which they had shed, nay, they proceeded to such great transgressions that the very same indignation which the Jews would naturally have against the Romans, had they been guilty of such abuses against them, the Romans now had against the Jews for their impiety in regard to their own religious customs. Now, it just doesn't even make sense. The Romans had indignation against them because they were so impious about their own holy place. The Romans were very superstitious, like Paul says to the people in Athens, I perceive you're very superstitious or very religious. These Romans had many gods, but they cared about them. They didn't just desecrate their statues and all that kind of stuff like was happening. And so things had just switched. These guys were desecrating their own temple, and the Romans were saying, "What are you guys doing?" They were, we'll see, but they were trying to protect the temple, because even though God of the Israelites wasn't necessarily one of their gods, he was a god, and they didn't want to get on the bad side of any gods. So they were trying to protect it, but we'll see that even clearer as we go. Right there, it says, "Nay, indeed, there were none of the Roman soldiers who did not look with sacred horror upon the holy house, and adored it, and wished that the robbers would repent before their miseries became incurable." The Romans were going to put a stop to this stuff, whatever it took. They were hoping that the Jews would just say, all right, you got us, we're throwing in our arms, and we'll start paying the taxes like we're supposed to, like everybody else is doing to the Romans. And they would not do it. They were the children of God, and God was not going to allow that temple to be destroyed. And so you Romans can do whatever you want to do. But Sue? I haven't ever read any estimates, but these groups of zealots were powerful enough to subdue the entire city. And they, between the two groups, they were either killing all the people, they were burning the storehouses so that they would just starve that much sooner. That's why the siege only lasted 5 months, because things got so desperate and dire that there was much less resistance to them breaking down the walls and all that stuff. But we don't know really in numbers how many there were of the zealots. But anyway, the Romans were saying, come on, you guys, this is a beautiful temple. We want to spare it. They were hoping that these robbers, the zealots who were just pillaging everything, hoping that they would quit so that they didn't have to destroy the temple. Paragraph 4 says, now Titus was deeply affected with the state of things and reproached John and his party and said to them, have not you, vile wretches that you are, by our permission, put up this partition wall before your sanctuary? Have not you been allowed to put up the pillars belonging thereto at due distances, and on it to engrave in Greek and in your own letters this prohibition that no foreigner should go beyond that wall? You guys have you all remember the little wall that goes around the temple that says anybody that goes past this point will do so on pain of death. So any Gentiles were not allowed into the temple area on pain of death. And he said, look, guys, we let you have that. We could have forced you not to have that wall around there, but we gave you permission to do it. Now you're doing the same thing that you didn't want the Gentiles to do, going in and desecrating the temple. Have we not given you leave to kill such as go beyond it, though he were a Roman? And what do you do now, you pernicious villains? Why do you trample upon dead bodies in the temple? And why do you pollute this holy house with the blood of both foreigners and Jews themselves? I appeal to the gods of my own country, this is Titus talking, and to every god that ever had any regard to this place, for I do not suppose it now to be regarded by any of them. I also appeal to my own army and to those Jews that are now with me, and even to yourselves, that I do not force you to defile this your sanctuary. And if you will but change the place whereon you will fight, no Roman shall either come near your sanctuary or offer any affront to it. Nay, I will endeavor to preserve your holy place, whether you will or not. This is Titus saying, look, just get out of the temple so we don't have to destroy it in order to get to you guys. I don't want to. I'm endeavoring to preserve this holy house, even though you don't seem to want to, and they apparently did not want to. Then in paragraph 5, as Josephus explained these things from the mouth of Caesar, both the robbers and the tyrant is John, not John, the writer of the book of Revelation, but John, the leader of one of the zealot groups. And the tyrant thought that these exhortations proceeded from Titus's fear and not from his goodwill to them, and grew insolent upon it. Oh, look at Titus. He's saying, I don't want to destroy your temple. He's afraid of us. He's scared. And so they just became more insolent and defying these Romans. Oh, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's hard even to believe. But when Titus saw that these men were neither to be moved by commiseration towards themselves, nor had any concern upon them to have the holy house spared, he proceeded unwillingly to go on again with the war against them. So that gives us a clear understanding of what Titus's attitude was. He did not want to destroy the temple. It was only because of the Jews and their insolence, and they're using the temple as a place to fight from, that caused it all to happen. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll look at chapter 11. This is kind of a review. We read this verse last week, but just to get us up to speed, John was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there." Well, who's in the temple of God now, messing with the altar? And it's those zealots. And we'll see in another reading, if we have time to get to it, that these people had quit offering the sacrifices. They were not doing it anymore. The daily sacrifices had ceased. They had just given up on it, given up on God. Anyway, God says, now we're going to measure the temple and the altar, but leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And so this court of the Gentiles, don't measure it, because the Gentiles are going to have this, and they're going to tread the holy city for 42 months. That 42 months was the time from when Vespasian and Titus had landed in Caesarea, going to head up to Galilee to subdue Galilee, and then coming down to Judea to subdue it, and the time until the temple, until the walls were breached and the city sacked and the temple burned. That was 42 months, a time, half a time, 1,260 days. All these references are to 3.5 years. That was the time that the Romans came in to bring judgment on the people of Israel. It was God's doing that they were doing this. And so this city would be tread for 42 months. Now, I think we read this last week, but didn't get a chance to talk about it. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. When you're clothed in sackcloth, what does that indicate? Mourning. So something has been happening that requires mourning, and these 2 witnesses are going to prophesy clothed in sackcloth. In other words, oh man, what is going on here? These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. And last week I just mentioned that this is the divine explanation of the 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before God. So now you know. Well, okay, so what are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands? We're going to look at Zechariah right now. In Zechariah, it says, then the angel, this is chapter 4, then the angel who was speaking with me returned and roused me as a man who is wakened from his sleep. And he said to me, what do you see? And I said, I see and behold a lampstand, all of gold, with its bowl on top of it, and its 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps which are on top of it. Also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and the other on its left side. Sound anything like Revelation? Exactly. Then I said to the angel who was speaking to me, saying, what are these, my Lord? And so the angel who was speaking to me answered and said to me, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord, I don't. Then he said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, saying, not by might or power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. So these lampstands, or the golden lamps, and the olive trees supplied the oil for the lamps, and they represent the word of God, God's spirit. That's what they represent in Ezekiel, or in Zechariah. I'm going to continue reading, though. Then I said to him, what are these two olive trees on the right of the lampstand on its left? And I answered the second time, said to him, what are these two olive trees, olive branches, which are beside the two golden pipes, which empty the golden oil from themselves? And so he answered me, saying, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the two anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. And so Zechariah says these two olive trees are two anointed ones. Well, who are anointed ones? Who gets anointed in the Old Testament? There's three candidates. Now, I'm not talking about who individual, but what kind of person gets anointed? A king. There's people anointed kings, and there's prophets. They anointed the prophets, and the priests. They anointed the priests. So these are three. So it's got to be either a prophet, a priest, or a king that these two are talking about. And I'm going to go out on a limb briefly and tell you that we will soon see that this refers to Moses and Elijah. Moses, they were both prophets. One was the lawgiver and prophet. Moses was the lawgiver representing the law, but he also was a prophet. Elijah was a prophet representing the prophets. So you have the law and the prophets. These, we'll see in just a second, these are the two witnesses. The law witnessing and the prophets witnessing. In other words, the Old Testament is before God testifying about everything about the Jewish nation, where they had come to, and what they had done in their time of existence. So I'll show you that as we get to this next part. If anyone wants to harm them, these two witnesses, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. God cares about these two witnesses. People will be punished if they try to harm them. These have the power to shut heaven so that no rain falls. You recognize that terminology there? Who shut the heavens that no rain would fall? Elijah. That was Elijah that that did that. And then it says, so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have the power over waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with all plagues. Sound familiar to you at all? Is there any mistake who we're talking about? That is Moses. Moses did that. So who are the two witnesses? Elijah and Moses. Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets, the two witnesses. So they're the ones that are before God testifying. And so that answers that question. So when they finished their testimony, when the law and the prophets were done, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, and we know that to be Satan, we talked about that before in another chapter, will make war against them. So Satan is always making war against the word of God. But in this case, it says he will make war against them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city. What is the great city? Without reading any further, There's a lot of people today that, oh, the great city is Babylon or New York or Rome or anything else, but the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Well, let me look in Isaiah 1, chapter verses 1 and 10. Isaiah, or God, refers to Jerusalem as Sodom because they had just perverted God so much. And in Ezekiel 16, these references, Ezekiel refers to Israel as Egypt. And so these are metaphors. You're just like Sodom, or you're just like Egypt. Jesus did the same thing in his teaching while he was here on this earth. But how many places was our Lord crucified? He was only died once, and after once and for all. And where was he crucified? Jerusalem. So anybody who wants to tell you that the holy city is anywhere besides Jerusalem that the Revelation is talking about, send them to this place because it spells it out about as clear as you can possibly have it. The holy city is Jerusalem. It's where our Lord was crucified. And it's here that this is saying that these two witnesses would be killed. That doesn't sound too good, does it? If the two witnesses are the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. Well, let's read a passage from Josephus and see how alive the law and the prophets were in Jerusalem at this particular time. Now, just keep in mind, we're talking about how alive the law and the prophets were the people keeping it, that sort of thing. Now Titus gave orders to the soldiers that were with him to dig up the foundations of the Tower of Antonia and to make him a ready passage for his army to come up, while he himself had Josephus brought to him, for he had been informed that on that very day, which was the 17th day of Tammuz in Hebrew, the sacrifice called the daily sacrifice had failed, and they had not been offered to God for want of men to offer it. And that the people were grievously troubled at it, and commanded him to say the same things to John, that is, John the zealot, that was the only one that was kind of represented leadership in Jerusalem at the time, that he had said before that if any malicious inclination for fighting, he might come out with as many of his men as he pleased in order to fight, without the danger of destroying either his city or temple. So Titus is saying, bring all the men you want out and fight. Just get out of the temple without the danger of destroying it. I won't destroy your temple if you'll come out to me and fight. So, but that he desired that he would not defile the temple, nor thereby offend against God. This is Titus saying to a Jew, John, leader of the zealots, get out. I don't want you to offend against God. I don't want you to defile the temple, that he might, if he pleased, offer sacrifices which were now discontinued by any of the Jews whom he should pitch upon. So he was wanting to reestablish the sacrifices and make sure that the God of Israel was on his side, along with all the other gods that he looked upon. But the Jews had stopped it. They didn't have anybody to offer the sacrifices. They had stopped the daily sacrifices. These had been going consistently every single day for 200 years. And now they just let it go. We don't have enough people to do it, so forget about it. Upon this, Josephus stood in such a place where he might be heard, not only by John, but by many more, and then declared to them what Caesar had given him in charge. And this is in the Hebrew language, So he earnestly prayed them to spare their own city and to prevent that fire, which was just ready to seize upon the temple, and to offer their usual sacrifices to God therein. At these words of his, a great sadness and silence were observed among the people. But the tyrant himself, that is, that John Zealot, cast many reproaches upon Josephus with imprecations besides. So he was just swearing up and down, and you're just a traitor, Josephus, and we're not going to listen to you. And at last added this withal, that he did never fear the taking of the city because it was God's own city. You're not going to take this city. This is the city of God. God's protecting this city, and you're not going to get us. Well, what did Jesus said in Matthew 24 or Matthew 23 at the end? Behold, your house is left to you desolate. God's not here anymore. And so it was not God's own city anymore. He said, I'm done with you. I'm leaving. Well, in answer to which Josephus then said thus with a loud voice, and you can hear the sarcasm as you read this, to be sure, you have kept this city wonderfully pure for God's sake. Well, you've done a great job of that. The temple also continues entirely unpolluted, nor have you been guilty of all impiety against him for whose assistance you hope. They were hoping for assistance from God, but oh, you guys are sure not guilty of any impiety against God. He still receives his accustomed sacrifices. Or does he? Then he says, Josephus says, vile wretch that you are, if anyone should deprive you of your daily food, you would esteem him to be your enemy. But you hope to have God for your supporter in this war, whom you have deprived of his everlasting worship. And you impute those sins to the Romans, who this very time take care to have our laws observed, and almost compel these sacrifices to be still offered to God, which he gave by your means, which have by your means been intermitted. They had quit doing it because of John. Who is there that can avoid groans and lamentations at the amazing change that is made in this city? What a change this city has become, how terrible it's become. Since very foreigners and enemies do now correct that impiety which you have occasioned, while you, who are a Jew and was educated by our law in our laws, are becoming a greater enemy to them than the others. You guys are a worse enemy to the people of Israel, to the people of Jerusalem, than the guys outside the walls trying to knock the wall down, the Romans. But still, John, it is never, he's still talking, this is Josephus still talking to John, but still, John, it's never dishonorable to repent and amend what has been done amiss, even at the last extremity. You have an instance before you in Jeconiah, the king of the Jews, if you had a mind to save this city, who, when the king of Babylon made war against him, did of his own accord go out of the city before it was taken, and did undergo a voluntary captivity with his family, that the sanctuary might not be delivered up to the enemy. This is Old Testament stuff, King Jeconiah. And Josephus knows this stuff. And that he might not see the house of God set on fire, on which account he is celebrated among the Jews. This Jeconiah is celebrated amongst the Jews because he gave up and got out so that the temple was not destroyed. So his memory has become immortal and will be conveyed fresh down to our posterity through all ages. This, John, is an excellent example in such a time of danger. And I dare venture to promise that the Romans shall still forgive you. And take notice that I, who make this exhortation to you, am one of your own nation. I, who am a Jew, do make this promise to you, and it will become you to consider who I am that give you this counsel and from where I am derived. For while I am alive, I shall never be in such slavery as to forgo my own kindred or to forget the laws of our forefathers. You have indignation at me and make a clamor at me and reproach me. Indeed, I cannot deny, but I am worthy. Pardon me. I lost it. I am worthy of worse treatment than all this amounts to, because in opposition to fate, I make this kind invitation to you and endeavor to force deliverance upon those whom God has condemned. And who is there that does not know what the writings of the ancient prophets contain in them? And particularly that oracle, which is just now going to be fulfilled on this miserable city. Remember what Jesus said, not one stone would be left standing on another. That's the oracle he's referring to. It's about to be fulfilled. For they foretold that this city should be taken when somebody shall begin the slaughter of his own countrymen. And are not both the city and the entire temple now full of dead bodies of your countrymen? This is Josephus telling other Jews. It is God, therefore, it is God himself who is bringing on this fire to purge the city and the temple by means of the Romans, and is going to pluck up this city which is full of your pollutions. The law and the prophets were lying dead in the streets because they gave up. They weren't doing the sacrifices. They were polluting the temple. They weren't doing anything. They had pretty much killed the law and the prophets because of Satan's influence. We don't have time to go any further, but I'm just going to read this next verse so that you don't think the prophets actually got killed forever. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 years or 3.5 days, and not allow their dead bodies to put into the grave. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another because of the two prophets who tormented those who dwell on the earth. Then those, now after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet. So it's a happy ending, even though these people had put to death the law and the prophets. God's going to revive them. So anyway, we'll talk about that stuff next week. We don't really have time for any questions, but if you have a question, you can talk to me either after now or after worship services. Until we start again in 12 minutes, you're all welcome to relax and talk to each other. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everyone. It is good to be here. Once again, I just got it way ahead in my notes. I think I just want to sit back down and let Jesse keep leading songs and giving us little sermons. That's fantastic, that energy that comes from us being joined together. We're lifting our voices in song. So that was wonderful this morning. So I'm going to try and see if I can chew gum and walk at the same time, because I've got a clicker for my notes and a clicker for the slides. So we'll see how well I do. So the lesson this morning is titled Follow Me, as you can see on the board there. And I called it that because what I want to talk about this morning is leadership. And I know that a lot of you probably just went, especially the ladies and the young people, elders, again, really? Haven't we just done that? But that's not where I'm going. Just stick with me for a minute, because I'm not going to talk about the people that lead at the table, the people that lead singing, the people that get up and do announcements, or the people like me that get up and try and preach. Not that any of those things are wrong or that they're not important, but that's just not where I want to go today. This may not work. I may just have to go back to the way I normally do it. Because I want us to see that leadership, it happens every day. And in ways we're not even aware of all the time. And so that's what I want to focus on this morning. It does happen in those traditional roles, the CEO, the military leaders, the business owners, those kind of things. When you think about leadership, it certainly does happen in those areas, but it also happens in those less traditional moments as well. Times that, again, like I said, we may not recognize that we're leading. We're not seeing the eyes that are on us. But those moments are and can be just as powerful as those big things that we've discussed already. So what I want to dive into this morning as we talk about leadership. Here's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt there. He's one of my favorite historical guys, but this is, people ask the difference between a leader and a boss. The leader leads, the boss drives. Just keep that thought in mind as we move through this here. But the first thing I want us to see from this study of leadership this morning is that our age is irrelevant to leadership. Look at 1 Timothy with me. Let no one look down on you for your youthfulness, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example to those who believe. I don't know how old Timothy was when this was written to him, but clearly he was a younger guy, right? Because he's telling him, don't let him look down on the fact that you're a young guy. And it doesn't really matter anyway how old he was. He's given these instructions. He's told to get after it and to step up and to exude these qualities that he lists in the verse here. And don't be afraid of the fact, afraid of doing that just because of the fact that you're a young guy. That's what a leader does. He steps up when it's time to. And so I want to tell you guys a little story here. And I know that most of you are probably aware of both what FC College is, Florida College, and then the camps that they put on around the country every year. And we've been taking our kids to one in Oregon for 9, 10, 11 years now. But this last summer, after going to Oregon, that group of kids from there, about 6 of them from the Northwest, my son included, decided they were going to the Colorado camp. Because there was someone from Colorado at the Oregon camp, and they're like, you got to come, we need help, we need kids. So this group went. And that group of 6 kids from Washington went to that camp and were so involved. Grant led a worship talk. Hudson was leading singing. Cody and Will and Bowden and Summer were just all in from the minute they got there. These guys from Washington were the life of the party, is what Josh, I don't know if any of you guys know Josh Higgins, but he's the one that leads the camp. And we got to talk afterwards because he said this group absolutely made that camp. And he had an 18-year-old kid that had been coming to the congregation there and had kind of fallen away over the past years. Sports had gotten in the way. Other things had become more important to him than religion. And so he comes to this Colorado camp. And because of these 6 kids, I'm sure there were other people involved too, but these are the 6 I know about. And their leadership, this 18-year-old kid saw a better way. And apparently, I don't know the exact layout of the camp, but apparently you have to drive from one part down past the cabins to another part for whatever they were going down to. And on the way down there, this 18-year-old boy who'd sort of fallen away, out of nowhere says, I need to be baptized. So they stop the car in front of the cabins. He runs in, he grabs his towel, he gets back in the car. They're just about ready to take off again. And a second 18-year-old kid from the congregation there says, what am I doing? I know it. I need to be baptized too. He goes and gets his towel. They're just about ready to take off again. And Bowden says, what am I doing? I need to be baptized. He gets his towel. And I didn't hear about Will, the 4th one, but there were 4 baptisms that night on the side of a mountain in Colorado in a horse trough, a freezing cold horse trough in the dark. Josh said that all stemmed from these kids being leaders. The witnessing of these young men and women living the way they've been asked to by their Creator. And so, again, this behavior allowed this 18-year-old to see a different way. And he took it and he got baptized. And his leadership in making that decision rolled back downhill to 3 other individuals, my son included. And this is the photo I got Saturday morning. What a week. These are the, let's see. I don't see Will in that picture anyway. What a week indeed. 4 baptisms, right? But wait, there's more. Because I don't know if anybody remembers the last time that I was here preaching, there was a whole group from Monroe in the back here, the Capelli and the Lynch clan, and then a couple of kids from the Oregon camp that are great friends were in the audience as well. And Ben Tips came forward and said he wanted to be baptized. And so we checked on the status of the baptistry here and it was broken. No water in it, can't use it. So that, well, that's fine. They were staying at the river in Leavenworth. So this baptistry being broken was a blessing because not only was Ben baptized, on the walk from the cabin to the river, his older brother Lucas was baptized as well, decided he wanted to be baptized as well. 6 baptisms in the space of a month from this group of people. And that Ben and Lucas being baptized again was him having contact with him, having conversation about what they had at that Colorado camp and what they did. And so the reason for all of this, me pointing this out, is because I want you young people to be aware of the potential you have. The ability you have to stand out and stand up for your Lord. You can be leaders right now and make a difference. Not when you hit 18 or when you graduate from college or when you get married and move away from the congregation you're in and then move back once you're done. Right now, you guys can be leaders. And as older members of the body, we need to recognize that. We need to see the contribution that these people can make. And they will if we'll let them. You know, it's often said that they're the future of the church, the young people. I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. They're not the future of the church. They're the church now. Just as much as I am a member of this church. And I don't know about any of you, but do you see any passages in the New Testament about junior Christians? I don't. If they've chosen to put on Christ, they're as much a brother or sister as anybody else in this room. Granted, less experienced, but we all started there at one point, didn't we? So I challenge us to see that potential. And once they've made that decision, we've got to pull up beside them and foster that decision and work with them and help them to grow in the ways that they've been asked to. So many times those younger kids that get baptized, we're like, oh yeah, he's only, 12, 14, 13, whatever it is. He'll grow up and then we'll start using him. Put him to work. If for nothing else than to do the job that you were going to do, right? You can have a break for a week. That was a joke. But the effort we put into those kids now, today, that will secure the future of this congregation. The next thing I want us to look at is, as in terms of leadership, is that leaders look generations into the future. You know, as a man, I often get stuck in the very right now. What's in front of me? Is this thing broken? If it is, I'm going to focus on that and fix it. If it's not, okay, boom, move on to the next thing right here in front of me. That's it. That's all I can do. Full attention all the time. And before I know it, it's been 10 years down the road and I'm still, in this one lane, right? How often as a man have you gone, how did it get to be Sunday again already? Like, where did the week go? I was going to do these things and these things, and here it is Sunday again already. But this is an area where I feel like you ladies shine. Because you can do this. Like, got them all in the air, right? If this is me juggling, I've got that one ball and that's it. And you try and throw me a second one, but I'm going to swat that thing away because I know that's gone. It ain't happening. I mean, technically I can juggle 3 balls, but not very well and not for very long. But you guys are really good at seeing all of this stuff. It gives you the ability to look ahead. And it gives you the insight to say, you know what? I know this is working right now today, but what does this look like in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? How will taking this action or not taking it play out down the road? But look at this with me. One more, there we go. It says in 2 Timothy 1:5, for I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. We learn in Acts 16:1 that Timothy's father was a Greek, and it says his mother was a believer, but it doesn't say that his dad was. I mean, it doesn't explicitly tell us that his dad wasn't a believer, but that's kind of implied from the fact that Lois and Eunice had to take him aside and teach him, right? So they saw that they're going to need to take action. If their future generations are going to continue to be Christians, they needed to do something about it. They needed to instruct that boy if the father wasn't going to. That's leadership. That's stepping in where something isn't being done, just because you notice it isn't being done. They knew the future of their family depended on them doing what someone else wasn't going to do. We aren't told, but maybe they were ridiculed for it. Maybe it caused fights between the father and Eunice. Like, why are you wasting this boy's time with this whole one God thing? He's so weak, they nailed him to a tree. Really? This is what you're going to do? Instead, they looked at the future and they said it's worth fighting for. The world will be a darker place if I don't do this thing. So let's all be a Lois or a Eunice and look ahead. Leaders must lead with passion is the next thing I want us to think about here. Let's read Romans 12:8. It says, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in his generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. That the actual word there for zeal is diligence in the Greek. That means to be in a hurry, to do something with eagerness, to apply oneself earnestly to a task. That's passion, isn't it? You're in a hurry to get things done. You are acutely focused on the business you need to address. That's passion. So think about this for a second. It's Christmas, 1776. You're standing on the banks of the Delaware River. There's a blistering storm blowing in. The wind is whipping around you, and there's sleet and rain and wind and hail and snow. And words come down the line that your lunatic general wants to get in tiny little boats and cross the river in this storm. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be dark. So at sunset, you report to your post, and you see that that is in fact what is happening. And so you start loading the boats, and this is what you see. The general in the center of that first boat, hunkered down, using everyone else as a shield to block him from the wind. And he says, come on, boys, let's go. That's not very inspiring, is it? That's passionate. Instead, this is what he did. He didn't try and make himself comfortable at everyone else's expense. He stood headlong facing into the gale. I would assume in the first boat, now I don't know who took this photograph, but to know whether or not it's historically accurate, but this is the one that's always presented, right? He's showing those around him how deep his belief in and commitment to the cause is. Isn't he? This is us. If we stand up for Christ, we're going to be at the front of the boat. We're going to face the blustery wind and the rain and the hail, just like he did. But flip over to 2 Timothy with me. Be diligent to present yourselves approved to God as a worker who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. Again, that's the same word for zeal that we saw in the previous passage. It's diligence. It's commitment. It's effort and work. And God's asked us to stand just like this on his behalf. Let's be passionate leaders like he's asked us to be. So the next thing I want to talk about, that leaders must hug the cactus. And some of you may or may not have heard this. I just heard about it not too long ago before I put this lesson together. Where's my photo? There you go. That gives you some better illustration there. And in the broadest sense, it just means I've got to examine myself, right? I've got to look at how I'm doing and evaluate how things are going as a leader, right? But the more kind of dialed in usage, and the way I heard it used originally, was this idea that as the leader, I've got to acknowledge my failures and my weaknesses. You've got to admit that there's some prickly areas that you've got that somebody might not want to give a big old hug like that to. Paul does this very eloquently in Romans 7:14 to about verse 24. It's a pretty strong critique. I'm not going to read it for the sake of time this morning, but I know you guys know where that passage is. And, I wasn't a great guy, but he worked on it and he changed so that he would be more approachable to those he was leading. And he ends that set of verses there with, "Wretched man that I am." Probably, other than Jesus, one of the greatest leaders that you're going to see in the New Testament. But he looked at himself and said, "Wretched man that I am." That's the kind of honest assessment we need to take of ourselves for two important reasons. Because hugging the cactus doesn't just mean that you're admitting that your flaws or failures. You have to see them and then work to correct them. You can't just acknowledge them, right? That would be like James 2:15 and 16, be warmed and be filled, but I don't give you any food or clothing. I see your failure. I see the failure, but I'm going to do nothing about it, right? Or worse than that, I offer some platitude to make myself feel better. Like, I wasn't rude. Nadia was just touchy. She's extra touchy that day. I don't know what her problem was. It wasn't me, right? We need to make sure we're honest with ourselves. Second thing to recognize from Romans 24 is in that second half of the verse. Who will save me from this death? When it's constantly in my mind that the greatest leader this world has ever known, the completely and totally just, the most loving and compassionate and the most powerful leader of all, when I remember that he allowed himself to be nailed to a cross for me and for all of you, that allows me to lead with humility. It puts the right goal in front of my mind. When we are reminded that the goal of leadership is to help as many people as we can reach the eternal reward Jesus paid the ultimate price for, it makes it easy to work on yourself, doesn't it? To work on those rough edges. 2 Corinthians 13:5, Galatians 6:4, 1 Corinthians 11:28 all tell us to examine ourselves for the purpose of self-improvement. So let's all take a moment and hug the cactus. Oh. So here's what I want to leave you all with this morning. We're all leaders. What's the primary goal of our leadership as Christians? Matthew 28:18 says, and Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me, Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to follow all that I commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. You guys all know this passage. The apostles teach others, were to teach others, who were to teach others, who were to teach others, who were to teach others, right? I never thought about it, but we could probably trace our discipleship, our teaching, back to the apostles. Not probably, we know that's where it came from. Too bad there isn't a genealogy.com for that, right? That would be kind of interesting. Not that it matters, but just for the sake of. If they had shirked their role as leaders, we wouldn't be here. If the 12 had just said, you see what happened to him? I'm out. I don't want any part of that. This guy isn't who he said he was. That's our role, to lead others to Christ. And we're all capable of that. It isn't just the preachers and the elders and the deacons and those who teach classes. We often get hung up on that. Well, I can't teach anybody, so I'm not responsible. I don't know how to lead a class. I've never done that. The words just like, I start in and the words just get jumbled. There's no way I could teach a class. So what? That isn't the only way it happens. It comes in so many forms. From the most simple thing of you're seen leaving your house every Sunday and Wednesday by your neighbors. You comment about being at church to your friends and your family. You don't use foul language like a lot of the world does these days, right? Most of the world, I would say, unfortunately, when you're out in it. It's in the way you treat and talk to your spouse. It's how you deal with your kids. It's how you respond to your parents, both as younger people with older, still in the house situation, the younger people here, and those of us that have parents, older parents that we're dealing with, that are getting to the age where they start to need more help from us, right? The manner in which you interact with your coworkers, how you perform your job. All of these small things get you noticed, and people see a difference, which may be an open door in the future if they see that difference in you. So never, ever doubt your ability to lead, even if it isn't in this traditional George Washington leading across the Delaware kind of way. If you're blessed with that opportunity, that's great. But it isn't all going to be that way. And the other idea that we need to let go of is this idea that every conversation I have with a non-believer needs to end up with them getting wet. We get hung up on that too. Well, I don't know enough to get them all the way into the water. That's okay too. Because you may only get a few minutes with these people. It's a quick moment in the supermarket. It's a comment at the gas station or the restaurant, or the opportunity you have on a plane ride, sitting next to someone, in the break room at work. And sometimes the best I can do is put a pebble in that person's shoe. Start them thinking. And again, that's perfectly okay to be just that. After all, it says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God caused the increase. It's got nothing to do with me. Other than the fact that I need to be brave enough to open my mouth. And I'm not asking you guys to go door knocking or handing out tracts or stand on the street corner with the microphone yelling at people. Because being a leader for Christ is really, really simple. We just have to reflect Jesus in your encounters with other people. That's it. When your life mirrors the life of Christ, people are going to be drawn to that. And they're not even going to know why. They see something different and they want to be a part of that. They see the care and the concern that you have for them and your family and other people. And that's a door that they can walk through if we'll just open it. So we're going to stand and sing at this time the invitation song, and I'm going to give this back to Carl before I forget. If anyone has been studying and has decided they want to come forward and obey the gospel, we offer you that opportunity to do so as we come forward, stand and sing.